When I was doing my second playthrough of Red Dead Redemption 2, I was really captivated by the game's open world, and the insane amount of secrets and mysteries it has hidden away all throughout the map. As foolishly, on my first playthrough, I mostly ignored exploration to experience the story.
I had a goddamn plan! John.
Which was a huge mistake looking back, as the game's world itself is just as compelling and interesting as the fantastic main story. And not only is the game insanely beautiful to look at and explore, it also has a deep sense of anxiety and danger that lurks in the background, that only grows stronger and more apparent as you explore and encounter more mysterious, weird, and straight up horrific things that the game is just saturated with. And it gives Red Dead Redemption 2's world a whole new aura and sense of mystery that I found to be extremely engrossing and really fun to see what you can just go out and find in the world. And the whole thing is a pure masterclass in environmental storytelling. So today, I'd like to take a look at all, or most of the strange and mysterious things and places all throughout the game. But I'll definitely miss a thing or two. This game is bigger than Dutch's ego, and people are still finding new mysteries and clues to this day. And I'm gonna rank them from least to most mysterious / creepy / grim / whatever. And of course, this is just my personal opinion, and for fun. But do let me know if I missed any details or side stories that you liked in this game. And let's not waste any more breath, and get started with... In the northern reaches of West Elizabeth, there's a lonely cabin that we can enter. But once you step inside, you're greeted by a massive grizzly bear just chilling inside, who roars in your face like Freddy Five Nights, and then immediately mauls you, forcing you to button mash for your life. And after blasting the bear's head, we can find that the bear had busted a hole in the back of the cabin, and was dining on the owner when we arrived. And we can also learn that this cabin's owner was a poet, but a seemingly pretty bad one. Now, I'm no poet myself, but busting out the scientific names of animals to force a rhyme seems like bad practice. And he was also a massive enjoyer of the outdoors and the frontier lifestyle, and he wanted his family to move in with him so they could enjoy the wonders of living a life so closely connected to nature. And he got real connected to nature alright. Nothing too freaky, but extremely ironic and unlucky for the poor bastard living here. On the cliffs of Big Valley is a small but charming little blue house that we can come across. And on the front porch, we can find a few packages along with a note. And from the note, we learn that Jim, the owner, had gone to pick up his new wife from her mother's house. How cute. Also, the door here will gift you a small bird corpse if you hold R on the porch. A little weird. But if we head down the road a short distance, we can spot a man looking down over the cliff. And if we join him and resist the extremely tempting urge to push him off the cliff, we can spot a man's body and the remains of a crashed wagon and horses on the slope below. So after tumbling down, we can find a photo of a woman on the man's body, and in a lockbox in the wreckage, we can find a marriage certificate for a James Payton and a Mildred Barr. So this is our Jim, who somehow drove his whole wagon off a cliff and crashed on his way to pick up his new wife, who's gonna have to find a new husband now. Nothing mysterious, but another great, grim example of excellent environmental storytelling. Dormin's Crest is a small, snowed-in hunting shack up in the Western Grizzlies, and inside of it, there isn't much to see or grab, but there is a trail in the snow leading from the front door that we can follow, which will lead us to a frozen corpse of a man in a sitting position, holding a generic carbine repeater that we can take from his cold, dead hands. And it seems that this man went hunting and eventually froze to death while sitting out on this overlook. And this appears to be a clear reference to the Western movie Jeremiah Johnson, where old JJ finds the frozen body of a hunter named Hatchet Jack, sitting with his .50 caliber hunting rifle. Hatchet Jack also has a letter on him, a last will that whoever finds his body can also loot his gun. And that the reason he died was because he broke his legs after getting into a tussle with a bear, killing it with his boomstick, but freezing to death after being unable to return home with his broken legs. And that's probably what happened here. The hunter was injured and slowly froze to death, as I assume he didn't just willingly sit out here and freeze to death for just shits and giggles. And it's another great little bite-sized story. In the Grizzlies East area is a lonely cabin called Martha's Swain, and when we enter, we find it to be pretty unremarkable. Besides the skeletal corpse of a woman in the middle of the floor, there appears to be no signs of a struggle, and no blood on the ground either, no murder weapons, nothing. It looks like this skeleton just fell over and died one day, and had rotted away completely by the time we found the shack. And we can find a letter on the table inside, which is to Martha, our skeleton in question, from a man named Garfield, who was a Confederate soldier. The letter tells us that Garfield had become disillusioned with the Southern cause, and he feels like a fool for ever even believing in it, wanting nothing more than to desert and return to Martha, who was a Yankee, his supposed mortal enemy. He also mentions that he'll soon be going to battle in Scarlet Meadows, under General Harris's command, but he says that the Confederates are exhausted and have almost no chance of winning, so if we head to the only battlefield on the map, Bolger Glade, in a wooded part of the battlefield, we can find a skeletal body in a Confederate uniform, who has a letter to Martha on him, so this must be the remains of Garfield, and the letter tells him that his disillusionment with the cause is a sign of growth for him, and she encourages old Garfy to desert the war and come back to her. But it seems that he got caught up trying to escape and was executed under Harris's orders. And he wasn't just shot either. The poor guy was tied to a tree and then ran through with a bayoneted rifle, the gun still stuck in his skeletal chest. Brutal. So it seems that Martha must have learned about Garfield's death later on, and maybe just up and died on the spot from shock, or took her own life in some non-violent way. But whatever the case, it's another hidden and tragic love story. Another great piece of storytelling. On the mountaintops just north of Moonstone Pond, we can find a giant woman's head carved into the mountainside, Mount Rushmore style, surrounded by some scaffolding. And amongst the scaffolding is a hanging man's corpse. So after we cut him down and search his body, we can find a note explaining what we're looking at. Apparently, this man had fallen so head over heels in love with this woman, he felt he needed to carve her massive face into the side of the mountain to show his love for her. But it seems he spent so much time actually carving the damn thing that the woman got bored and instead got freaky with that quote, "terrible French cad, that scribbler, that second-rate smearer of colors," which seems like a direct reference to the Painter Stranger quest with Charles Chatanet, whose Stranger questline deals with him banging and painting naked women and suffering the consequences of being an early 1900s gooner, which is a tough-ass scene for the sculptor, because Chatanet is such a little weasel. A little north of Rhodes, we can find this humble little farmstead. However, when we approach the place, we can spot blood all over the porch, and there's more where that came from when we enter, as we find two bodies, a man and a woman, assumedly a husband and wife, brutally slain, blood literally everywhere like someone beat these two to death with a bucket of red paint. And after we loot their house of supplies that they clearly don't need anymore, we can follow a blood trail leading from the porch, which leads us to a third body of a woman slumped against a wagon, seemingly having taken her own life with a loose cattleman revolver on the ground nearby. And if we loot her body, we can put this whole story together. This woman, Annette, and the husband of the house, Claude, had an affair in the past, but they were caught by Claude's wife, Harriet, and they had to end their sneaky links, Claude barely avoiding divorce. But it seems Annette needed that Claude hammer real bad, and started following him and trying to confront him in public. So he wrote her a letter to tell her to fuck off, which Annette clearly didn't take well, making a bloody mess of the couple before ending her own life. Just more grim and excellent storytelling. To the west of Van Horn, we can stumble on these oddly shaped ground formations, forming large ovals and swirling lines. And luckily, there's a small lookout tower that we can climb to get a full view, and we realize that it's a snake-shaped mound, made by some unknown builders. And this is a direct reference to the real-life Serpent Mound in Peebles, Ohio, a 1,348-foot-long and wavy snake-shaped mound, with one end in a spiral and the other end seemingly consuming an egg-like shape, just like in the game, it being the largest serpent effigy on Earth, fun fact. And the real-life Serpent Mound is just as mysterious as the in-game version too, as scientists are unsure as to who exactly built it. Some scientists claiming that it came from the ancient Adena culture, who lasted from around 800 BC to 1000 AD, who would have built it over 2,000 years ago. But others claim it was made by a later native culture, called the Ford Ancients, who would have built it from around 1000 to 900 or so years ago, with scientists still split on who were the original builders of the mound, as apparently, it's pretty tricky to accurately carbon date a mound of dirt, and both Fort Ancient and Adena artifacts and mounds can be found in the area. So it's likely that the mound was at least altered by the Fort Ancients around 1400 AD, but the answer as to who originally built it, what its meaning is, and what purpose it serves, remains as a fascinating mystery to this day. And that goes for our in-game Serpent Mound too, which is some pretty cool shit. In the scenic hills of New Hanover lies a small and comfy looking cabin, complete with a small chicken pen attached to it. But the door is locked, and once we bust in, we get absolutely bitch smacked by a grisly scene. An entire family of corpses. Mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, and young son, all slumped over dead and rotted, the whole family line wiped out. What the hell happened here? Did the chickens rise up? Well, not likely. But in all seriousness, there doesn't seem to be any sign of a struggle or scuffle, no damage or bloodstains to be found, and it looks like everyone here died while they were doing their normal tasks. To find the culprit, We can take a look at the cabin stove, and we can find that its smoke exhaust pipe had been damaged and had opened inside the cabin. So it seems pretty likely that when the family fired up the stove, it filled the whole cabin with smoke and choked out the entire family inside. And there's a good chance when you first visit the cabin, there will be some light smoke effects inside of the cabin and emanating from the broken part of the stove. And it's just an insanely grim and scarily realistic scenario. And this is another shack that we can enter, which is a little northwest of Valentine. The shack is locked up tight, but once we put our back into it and kick the door in, we enter to find another disturbing scene. The house has only 2 dead children inside, rotted and slumped over on the bed. And we can learn from a letter that we pick up in the cabin that these boys are named Glenn and Eddie, and their mother had left the cabin to track down some men and get their money back from them, leaving 4 days worth of food for them and barricading the cabin up tight, saying that she expected to return by the next night. But based on the scene, it looks like she never made it back, and the children inside slowly died of starvation and thirst, dying scared and trapped in their own home, which is an absolutely horrifying thing to even imagine happening. As for the mother and the men she went after, there aren't any clues or NPCs in the game that may be related to this mother, but if she never returned, it's safe to say that she's probably in the same place as the poor kids right now. Jeez. This is definitely one of the game's most notorious locations by now. As in northern Lemoyne, we can find this rundown estate with this rotund textbook definition of incest, sitting out on the porch, who will invite you in for dinner when he spots you, and he's soon joined by his wife, maybe? Who tries to further goad you into coming inside. And again, if you decide against all logic and reason to join them for dinner, you'll soon learn that this couple has a bit of a deranged Lannister dynamic, as Bray reveals that he and Tammy lost their parents as kids, but still have each other before eating each other's food in this freaky-ass manner. Leaving John or Arthur just completely frozen in shock. And we then take drinks with the couple, the drinks quickly knocking us out. And once we're incapacitated, Bray and Tammy then rob you for all your cash and dump your body in a mass grave full of muddy, rotting corpses, which we escape from. And when we return to the farm to pay the couple back for their hospitality.
You ain't.
Now keep still.
We can find our money stashed behind this creepy-ass portrait of a woman, this being their late mother. And upstairs, we can find another portrait of their parents, except this painting is scratched out and damaged. The father in the painting's head is all defaced. And if we open up the wardrobe next to the scratched out painting, we can discover some loose bones and a skull inside, assumingly being one of their parents' bones. So it seems that Tammy and Bray had killed their parents, likely over their incestuous relationship, and began using their farm as a front to kill and rob travelers that they lure into their house like they did to us. And this is a likely reference to the real-world serial killer family, commonly known as the Bloody Benders, a family of 4 people who operated an inn and general store in Kansas in the early 1870s, where they would rob and kill travelers who stayed with them and possibly murdered up to 20 people total. And the newspapers at the time had claimed that the Benders' 2 children, Kate and John Bender Jr., were actually married to each other, a lot like the incest couple at Aberdeen Pig Farm. Absolutely filthy encounter. Well done, Rockstar. Now, this is a very common one by now, and you've probably run into this well-dressed British guy almost dozens of times, who if you kill and loot his corpse, you find his name is Nigel, calling out and searching all over the map for his friend Gavin, who has apparently gone missing. And this guy pops up pretty much everywhere, most towns, out on the road, what have you. But despite all this searching, he never seems to be able to find old Gav. Nigel's saying that he just up and vanished one night. He woke up and found himself Gavinless. And even after the epilogue's 8-year time skip, we can still find Nigel roaming the land, looking noticeably more disheveled and dirty. And when we speak to him again, he admits that he can't even remember what Gavin looks like, or if he was even a real person to begin with. But he still searches for him regardless, leaving it up to the player to try and decide if Gavin was ever a real person who went missing, or if this Nigel fellow is just suffering from a severe case of psychosis, searching for a man who only exists in his head, as we cannot find Gavin or an NPC that resembles him anywhere in the game. But if we go back and examine the letter Nigel has on his body, it seems to imply that Gavin is indeed a real person, as the writer, a British man named Tom, says that Gavin and Nigel are his best mates, and he even mentions Gavin's mother. But Tom also talks in a sort of overly patronizing tone to Nigel, and mentions another man, Brian Gold, had said some, quote, odd things about Nigel that Tom had to say weren't true, maybe alluding to his Gavin hallucinations. This letter being worded in a way that I can't really tell for sure if Tom is being genuine or not, or if he's just trying to placate or appease Nigel. And I see this whole encounter chain as a way of Rockstar just trolling the player, making them feel a bit like Nigel himself, as we rack our brains trying to figure out if Gavin was even real or not. But if I had to guess, Gavin is likely on the third UFO, with Princess IKZ in tow, and the third meteorite shoved in his back pocket. On this unassuming farm near Emerald Ranch, in one of the side sheds, we can find some real nasty shit. Inside is the graying, pantsless corpse of a man, and a dead sheep wearing a large pink bow. And if we approach the sheep's body, we can loot a gold wedding ring from its body. And all I have to say about that is, come on, man.
Bro, really?
Now, it's unclear how the man died. Did he plow this sheep until he expired? Or did someone walk in on this massive degeneracy and end the man and the sheep? And I don't think I want to know the answer. However, interestingly, you can find a similar bow-wearing sheep out in the wild too, just running loose. So it seems that this freak had more than one wife. These devs are fucking ridiculous. All over the slopes of Roanoke Ridge lurks the Murfree Brood gang, a massive, really massive, family of inbred hillbillies who prowl the cliffs and woods, kidnapping and brutally murdering travelers, and sadistically brutalizing and cannibalizing their corpses in their murder caves. As part of the main story, Arthur and Charles clear out a large Murfree cave, where we can spot some human skeleton totems. Murfree's going to town on some corpses, and we even save a woman from a cage in the depths of the cave, and she's so traumatized by what she saw the Murfrees do, she can barely speak or move. Not only is this torturous disembowelment cave freaky, there's plenty of freaky encounters on the surface with these goons too. Like when camping in Roanoke Ridge, you'll likely get held up by this Murfree duo who threaten you to not camp in the area, and always make sure to blast these guys in the back when they leave. And you can find them dumping bodies into water, or torturing someone who is tied to a tree with a torch. And they even ambushed me by rolling a flaming cart onto the dirt road, and then popped out of the trees to ambush me. And they really make Roanoke Ridge have a sort of Hills Have Eyes vibe, where you never feel truly safe when out exploring the area, as these sister-banging mutants really want your ass mowed like grass, and are completely relentless in their quest to kill you. This is another Stranger quest, where we're tasked with hunting down a serial killer on the loose in Red Dead Land, who has left 3 extremely mutilated corpses in 3 spots on the map, their corpses strung up in pretty complex ways, almost as if the killer fancies himself as some sort of murder artist, and he's got an ego, writing, "Look upon my works," like this disgusting chopped up body is a fresh new Van Gogh or something. And after we find and take the 3 map pieces that are stuffed into the mouths of the victim's severed heads, it leads us to a destroyed shack near Valentine, where we can then open the large cellar doors with the map's code, and enter to find the murderer's lair, with even more disemboweled and mutilated bodies inside. And there is blood absolutely everywhere. Real charming place you got here. And we soon get clonked on the back of the head by the killer, who is revealed to be this mustachioed man named Edmund Lowry Jr., who seems impressed that we found him. But before he can cut us up into another fucked up art display, Arthur thinks fast and beans Lowry in the head with a nearby severed head, and then beats his ass and hogties him up to return him to the Valentine sheriff. And once we arrive and hand him over, Lowry goes ape and pounces on the sheriff while snarling like a wild animal.
Get him off me!
And we gotta dome him in the head to save the sheriff, who is completely rattled by the whole encounter. And this whole quest is extremely grotesque, but also darkly funny, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. Up in the Snowy Grizzlies, we can find a remote shack nestled on a picturesque frozen lake. If we head inside, we can find the place snowed in and abandoned, and on a table are some old ice skates, a cigarette card for the famous ice skater Felix Hawley, and a small newspaper clipping saying, "Dreadful incident. Talented ice skater career cut short in terrible accident." So we can probably assume this cabin once belonged to Felix Hawley, who built this cabin to practice his ice skating out on the frozen lake. But near the house, we can find a dug-up grave, the coffin torn open to expose the body to the elements, which we can see is missing its right leg. So Hawley's mysterious injury must have involved his leg getting ripped off or completely crushed somehow, which ended his ice skating career. It's a little hard to do an axle on one leg, and maybe, unable to cope with the loss of his leg and career, Hawley offed himself, as the paper implies that the accident was not fatal, so the loss of his leg didn't kill him. But that's just an educated guess. However, on the headstone, written in red paint, is "No ice in hell," which honestly goes pretty hard for when you're trying to disrespect a dead ice skater. So it seems that someone had a serious grudge against Hawley, hating him so much that they dug up his grave and vandalized his headstone out of pure spite. And why this grave defacer had such rage against Hawley is and forever will be unknown. But it's just another amazing example of elite environmental storytelling in this game. One quest will have us running into distraught townspeople, asking for help finding their loved ones who went missing in the hills near Armadillo, and when we go to investigate, we find only loose shoes, a bone or two, and a small pool of blood on the desert ground, and it seems like whoever this was got completely eviscerated. And we do this a few times, until when we go to investigate, we instead find an injured man this time, who asks us to help him capture another man who he claimed had attacked him. And when we hogtie the guy up and return him to the guy we met, we soon learn that the man we're helping is actually a cannibal who has been eating people up in these hills like they got eyes. And we can then choose to either kill the cannibal and free the man like a normal, well-adjusted member of society, or let the cannibal eat him up if you really feel like evil maxing. But I like to think that the Marston boys look down on eating random people out in the hills. Very close to the Horseshoe Overlook camp is the ruins of a town called Limpany, completely scorched black and long abandoned after whatever catastrophe occurred here, completely destroying the entire town. And outside of a gold bar that you can collect in the burned out sheriff's office, there's very little to do here, leaving many players baffled as to what exactly happened here. But upon closer inspection, we can find several oil barrels scattered around the settlement, belonging to Cornwall kerosene and tar. So it's probably likely that Limpany had somehow run afoul of Cornwall, who had the town drenched in oil and then burned as an act of revenge, or perhaps to set an example for those who try to defy him. And I could totally see that being the case, as Cornwall had a man killed at his lonely oil derrick, after the owner refused to sell him the land. But for now, it's just some highly educated speculation, and this may have been a cut mission, or a cut side quest that would have really shown how much of a cruel bastard Leviticus Cornwall can be. We can also run into this guy who's looking to pick flowers for his wife, and he recruits John to pick 9 flowers to make a beautiful bouquet for her, which seems like a pretty harmless fetch quest. But once we gather up all the flowers and return to the man, we head into his crappy shack home and find that his wife is a rotting corpse sitting in a chair, the man acting completely nonchalant about it all, seeming completely unaware that his wife is a gangrenous carcass. And John and Jack are completely dumbstruck by this scene, and both say that they gotta go return to planet Earth before leaving the couple.
My angel.
Sounds like a fine idea. Well, I think I should get going now.
Well, you haven't had your tea. And Annabelle baked her special blackbird pie.
I'm sorry, mister. I guess I forgot I had an appointment with planet Earth.
And it's just a great little example of Rockstar getting goofy and grim with it. North of the Grizzly Bear Shack in Big Valley, we can find a pretty sizable cave that we can explore, and we see that there's a whole bridge inside, and it's lit with a few lanterns. And as we explore, we soon find that we aren't alone in this cave, as a voice speaks to us and tells Arthur or John to fuck off out of here and return to the light, the voice even saying that he's the devil, so we should get out of here if we know what's good for us.
I'm the devil. I'm the devil. Okay, I'm not the devil, but I want to be. I want to be. And that's even worse.
But if we don't listen to the voice, he eventually reveals himself, and shocker, he isn't the devil, just a wannabe. It's just a chubby dude in a big red robe and a devilish looking haircut, and he really doesn't like people, saying that he wants to be alone in this dank cave forever, and he's more than a bit melodramatic.
Go away.
Hey, mister.
Get out of my cave.
But it seems he's up in an inaccessible part of the cave, and I can't seem to get up there to mess around with him some more, so I just head out after he exhausted his dialogue. And it's a pretty funny encounter, but what the hell is this guy's problem? This cave kinda sucks. Near the border between New Hanover and Lemoyne, when riding near the train tracks at 3 a.m. or so, there's a small chance that a whole damn ghost train will appear and chug along the rails for a brief time before vanishing. This being one of the rarest encounters in the entire game, and you can only see it once per playthrough. And I'd bet that 99% of players have never even seen this thing once. But it makes me question, how the hell did an entire train become a ghost? Usually ghosts are seen as the lingering spirits of humans or animals that can't pass on to the afterlife for whatever reason. And spirits are usually only found in living beings. So how did a whole metal train obtain a spirit that can now manifest into a ghost train? Does the metal have a soul or something? I don't know. Freaky implications with this one. Although we cannot explore New Austin as Arthur, we can read in the in-game newspapers that Armadillo was hit by a series of plagues, lasting from 1898 to 1907, where it was hit by a scarlet fever outbreak, was then hit by the Desert Plague, and then got ravaged a third time by a typhus outbreak. God is just bombing threes on him, fucking the town over 3 separate times. But when we can finally explore Armadillo as John, we find that the town is being yet again obliterated by a deadly plague, this time being cholera, All the town's inhabitants look sickly and dying. Massive burning piles of garbage clog the streets. Most of the buildings are abandoned and crumbling. Del Lobo gangers ride roughshod through the streets, causing endless chaos. And we can commonly spot undertakers gathering corpses and throwing them into mass graves. It's extremely bleak. All except for Herbert Moon, of course, who looks fine and dandy, ready to blame the Jews for any misfortune he may face that day. Which may or may not be thanks to a dark magical pact with an unknowable entity wearing a top hat. But by 1911, Armadillo has seemingly fully recovered from its string of devastating plagues. The town is a bustling trade hub, the buildings are all restored, and the outbreaks have all been seemingly forgotten, as if a dark curse had been suddenly lifted from the town. Strange, man. Up in the Grizzlies, we can find this strange hovel in the woods, and when we get a closer look, it seems like we stumbled upon a literal witch's shack. It's full of candles, empty bottles, and bones of dubious origin, raw meat, and there's this special crow who sits and watches you as you explore the hut, never flying away. And of course, the literal witch's cauldron with a strange liquid bubbling in it. Yo, nasty-ass witch's brew? Bottoms up. And we can take a nice big swig of the cauldron's liquid, which will cause Arthur to pass out, who will wake up around 15 yards or so away from the hut, with all his cores restored. So it looks like this witch's brew restores you, at the cost of being teleported a couple yards away. A restorative potion that mildly inconveniences you. Worse things could happen after drinking weird witch's brew in the woods. We can drink the brew again, and no witch ever appears in the hut or the game, and the hermit dog lady in Big Valley likely isn't our witch in question. So for now, unless the witch is that unique crow that watches us, this witch's hut will be ever mysterious. When taking a stroll through the alleys of Rhodes, if we pass by the gunsmith, we can run into this man, or maybe an oversized boy, who pleads with us to help free him, and says that the crazy gunsmith has him locked in his basement, forcing him to act as his son. So if we head inside and stick up the gunsmith, we can unlock the option to check the basement, and after the gunsmith leads us down, we find that the man is dressed up in a child's sailor outfit in a makeshift child's room in the basement. And when we press the gunsmith as to why he's making a grown-ass man pretend to be his prisoner son, he completely deflects anything we say, seeming to completely believe this man is his son, treating the whole situation like it's nothing out of the ordinary, just a father and his rambunctious kid he sent to his room for stealing sweets. But if we free the captive, the gunsmith will then finally break down, saying that his own son Sammy had fallen into a fast-moving river while the gunsmith was teaching him how to shoot, the recoil knocking him in, and he couldn't find Sammy afterwards, which ruined his mental state, unable to bear the loss of his son, and he later abducted this man because he looked a lot like Sammy, apparently. This confession making me almost feel bad for the man, but not enough, so we loot the place clean and take a nice Lancaster repeater. And I really like this amazingly tragic and bizarre story that was made just for a side robbery. In the southern part of Hennigan's Stead, we can spot this small hut built up in a tree, and when we approach it, we hear an odd, man doing a bad Marge Simpson impression voice coming from the tree fort, yelling at us to go away and leave whoever is hollering at us alone.
Go the hell away! Just get away from me!
And if we ignore the yelling and look underneath the hut, we can see a man on all fours, standing on some loose wooden boards that we can shoot out. And if we shoot them enough, the man eventually falls out of his hut and dies on impact. Ouch. Sorry, man. But if we take a close look at the man, we can find that he isn't exactly a normal human. He's got a cleft, cat-like lip, a wide nose, and angular cat-like eyes. This game refers to him as the Tree Hermit, but in the files, he's labeled as the Cougar Man, which makes sense for his cougarish facial features. But this is also, like the Donkey Lady, a reference to a Red Dead Redemption 1 human-animal hybrid glitch that was posted to YouTube, where a cougar could spawn in with a human man's model, leading to this nonsense. The video's title even coined the name Cougar Man, which is likely where the devs got the name from, which is another funny, yet very weird encounter. Out in the New Austin boonies, we can come across this abandoned farmstead complete with a manual mill, and attached to the mill is the skeletal corpse of a diminutive woman wrapped in shitty old clothes with a donkey skull instead of a human cranium, known only as the Donkey Lady by the game. And upon closer inspection of the skeleton, we see that a donkey skull wasn't just placed on a human skeleton post-mortem. The toothy skull connects to the rest of the skeletal frame very naturally. So it looks like some poor donkey-headed hybrid lady was worked to death, pushing this mill around in this now abandoned homestead. Nobody ever bothering to move the body. But this is a reference to an honestly pretty creepy-ass glitch from Red Dead Redemption 1, where the game may spawn in a donkey with a woman's body, a donkey head, and human animations, who John can then hop on the back of and ride around on for the world's most unsettling piggyback ride. And the donkey lady's name even comes from the video's title that showed the glitch, which is a really cool little reference. When you move to meet Seth at Coots Chapel, you'll likely come across this creepy old lady, Alma Horlick, wearing all white, sitting all alone in the ruins of a brick shack. And when we talk to her, she tells us that she's waiting for her fiancé Peter to show up so that they can get married, and she eerily yowls about having the perfect day.
This was meant to be my perfect day. Please, sir. Something must have happened. I can't bear it.
But it seems that Peter is more than a little late to the ceremony, and she asks us to go to the saloon in Armadillo to try and find him. So we ask after him at the saloon, and after bribing this musician, he tells us that Peter hasn't been in the Armadillo saloon in over 20 years, and he tells us to check for him at Oddfellows Rest, which is a graveyard. And when we arrive there, sure enough, we find a tombstone belonging to a Peter Turner, who was betrothed to an Alma Horlick, who died from a blow to the head 17 years ago in 1894. So Alma has been waiting for 17 years at that ruined shack for Peter to appear, and all the while, he was taking an eternal dirt nap. So was Alma a ghost or something? She disappears from the game after this moment, but she may have just been a really mentally unstable woman who forgot how long it's been and that Peter had actually died almost 2 decades ago, and now desperately waits for Peter to return so she can finally have her perfect day. Ghost or crazy old coot? Who knows? In some in-game newspapers, we can come across an article about a missing Blackwater athletics club who had disappeared after heading out of town on a group run. The residents of Blackwater fearing that the club had been, quote, foully dealt with. And we can find these foul dealings in the Tall Trees area, where John can stumble upon a mass grave filled with the bodies of the Blackwater Athletics Club, which we can tell by their numbered jerseys, and they all have rotted skin and sacks over their heads, which begs the question, who killed these men? Maybe the Skinner brothers? They lurk and hunt in the Tall Trees area, and are known for disappearing travelers and sadistically torturing them, and a gang of their size would be capable of taking out the whole athletics club. But the athletics club's mass grave doesn't seem to match the MO of the Skinners, who prefer to tie up, mutilate, and hang their victims in increasingly complex ways, and this seems too efficient and straightforward of a killing for them. And I've also seen theories that the serial killer Edmund Lowry Jr. is the killer, but I doubt this even more, as Lowry's MO is to brutally dismember and then string up his victims' bodies in grotesque art displays. And I don't see how Lowry would have been able to overpower or incapacitate a whole team of athletic men. Lowry can only pounce on one person at a time like a deranged cougar. So for now, the mystery of the Blackwater athletics team remains just that. In Saint Denis, we can run into this quirky asshole Balkan inventor named Marko Dragic.
Fantastic. You Americans are nothing but shysters and traitors and slippery-tongued bull suckers.
I'm inclined to agree.
Who recruits us to pilot a torpedo-shooting miniature RC boat that he hopes that he can wow some investors with his magical electrical wave technology. However, this boat is just a means to an end to get some funding, as Marco's real project can be found at his impressively large lab, Dover Hill, up in the northern reaches of Roanoke Ridge, which is directly ripped from Warding Cliff Tower that Nikola Tesla had built. And we help Marco power up his massive electric pylon tower, and he uses it to channel a huge amount of electricity into a humanoid robot, who then awakens and starts walking around, doing a bizarro world sci-fi recreation of Frankenstein. But the robot soon runs out of juice and shuts off. But Marco is still ecstatic that he was able to give life to his new robot son. However, when we check back with him later, we find Marco dead and lying in a pool of blood, the robot nowhere in sight. So if we head into the mountains in Amberino, following this electric lantern near Marco's body, we can find the robot sitting alone on a snowy mountaintop, slowly turning its head, repeating, "Papa," over and over again. So it looks like the robot murdered Marco and then walked all the way out here, and he will just repeat his robotically forlorn Papa line until we shoot it in the head, where we'll then lean over a bit before going still, the light in its eyes going out. And it's really creepy and really uncanny. But at the same time, I don't exactly blame the robot. That dude was a total prick. The Native Burial is another POI in Big Valley, which holds some scattered totems, this large circular formation made of rock, and beds on stilts the natives would set up for sky burials, which was a common burial practice for the Sioux natives, who would bury their dead on these elevated beds, who would then be left out for a year to bake in the sun and would be eaten by various buzzards and birds, their bodies contributing to the cycle of life and nature. And once the bones are picked clean, they'd be taken down and buried later. And it's a pretty cool in-game history lesson. But weirdly, if you decide to desecrate the dead and throw a fire bottle at the stone circle, it'll cause the weather to drastically change, and it'll start storming until the fire is put out. Ominous. But this is probably just the native spirits telling you to fuck off and leave their rest alone. If we climb up to the top of Mount Hagen in the Grizzlies, we can stumble upon a mummified frozen corpse sitting alone near the summit. But this corpse is also completely decked out head to toe in Conquistador armor, and we can even take a sweet feathered Morion hat for ourselves to wear. Nice. But sadly, we can't store this hat in our horse's inventory, and it'll be lost once dropped, or if you change an outfit. Damn. But this of course begs the question, how the hell did Buddy get all the way up here? In real life, Spanish conquistadors operated mostly in Mexico, Cuba, the Caribbean islands, Florida, and the edges of the Gulf of Mexico, rarely ever venturing deep into the American landmass, outside of a few select expeditions, like the DeSoto expedition that made it all the way up to Tennessee and all the way into Arkansas, or the Coronado expedition, which made it all the way up to Kansas, and he even made it to the Grand Canyon. But apparently, he wasn't very impressed with it. But they weren't exactly climbing snowy mountains for fun. So either this guy got really lost, or was transported here somehow, and we will never truly know. In the southern reaches of Bayou Enwa swamps, we can stumble across his corpse face down in the mud, and when we get a closer look at the body, we see that his left arm is freakishly small and withered, and his face is pretty deformed too, the left side eyes drooping down significantly. And this mutant's name, life story, and how he ended up here is all lost and unknown, the game just referring to him as the quote, Withered Arm. However, in the mission where we attack the Braithwaite moonshine camps, the Rhodes deputy will mention that he had an uncle named Reginald, who apparently had a tiny hand on the end of a grown man's arm. But this doesn't seem to fully match the corpse's description, as the entire arm looks like a child's arm attached to an adult body. So that's probably not it. Maybe he's a resident of Butcher Creek, the only other place where mutations seem like the norm, and got lost and died in the bog here. But we can never know for sure, so there he shall lie. Identity forever unknown. On a hidden cliff edge on Mount Shan, we can find the half-buried bones of what appears to be an honest-to-God giant, a real-life Nephilim, who has been long dead based on the state of his fragmented skeleton, who if we look closely, we can see still has some loose brown hair strands connected to its head. We have almost zero information about this giant besides his remains, but based on another encounter in this game that I'll discuss later, there's a fair bit of evidence to support the theory that a race of giant humanoids are, or were, living in the mountains in the northern part of the map. In the western part of Big Valley near the Owangila Lake, you can find this circular grove of trees, all of which have various blocky and bearded faces carved into the trunks. And who carved these faces, what they represent, and why they were carved is all a complete mystery. Some thinking it was carved by ancient peoples, maybe by Native Americans, or some other group. And others theorize that the faces have a more symbolic existence. I saw a guy on Reddit who claimed that all the tree faces resemble the faces of the Vanderlyn gang members, but personally I don't really see it. And any significance that the faces have in the context of the game is extremely obscure. However, I have my own personal theory about these faces, as the carvings do share a resemblance to someone, but not any in-game NPC though, but rather a cut Neanderthal character, as the face's dimensions and the facial hair is almost perfectly matched to the Neanderthal. So if I were to guess, these faces were meant to have been carved by the Neanderthals very long ago. And also, it could be a reference to the weirwood trees from the Game of Thrones series. White, blood-drinking magical trees that have faces carved into them. The carved faces allowing the trees to see beyond the context of time and space. And in that universe, the faces were also carved by an ancient race of people, the Children of the Forest. So I think that may be the intended reference here, if the Neanderthal is indeed a match for the tree faces. But that's just my own personal speculation. In reality, these carvings remain incredibly mysterious, and still unsolved. East of Donner Falls in the Amberino Mountains lies a pretty whimsical landmark, this odd-looking dirt mound house, looking a bit like a hobbit house from Lord of the Rings, or your friend's Minecraft dirt house that he swears was for one night only, despite the lush green top. We cannot enter the house, nor do we ever meet its owner. All we can find is a treasure map and a broken roof window, and the Chelonian symbol drawn into the grass on the roof. Although no direct link between any Chelonian NPCs and this house have ever been discovered, so maybe we got giants and hobbits living in these Amberino hills. In a shack in Bayou Enwa, south of Lakay, we can find the most Cletus looking motherfucker of all time sitting out on his porch, who will invite Arthur or John to come inside his cabin for food, sounding pretty creepy while asking us to come in. So if you decide against your better judgment to enter his hut, Sonny, that's his name by the way, will clock you in the back of the head and knock you out, and Arthur will regain consciousness later, where Sonny will tell you that you struggled hard but lost the fight. Like, bro, are you fucking serious? So I guess we just got violated by the Lemoyne Booty Warrior. Good lord. And he then dumps you out in the swamps, and we can then recover and go pay Sonny back.
This is a mistake, you... Oh!
And inside his house, we find that his bed has chains and handcuffs on it. Great. And oddly, there's a newspaper scrap posted on the wall that seems to be from the Vietnam War era, mentioning Dong Tam, a U.S. Army base camp established in 1966, a solid 60 plus years in the future from this game. So is Sonny a time-traveling Vietnam veteran rapist or something? Because where the hell did he get this? Probably the most well-known scary event in the entire game by now. The Night Folk are a mysterious group of murderers who lurk in the swamps of Bayou Enwa, who only come out at, well, it's in the name. And there are several ways to encounter these night freaks. You can find bodies tied up in trees in the swamp, and they'll jump out and attack when you go to investigate. And we can also run into this woman in a white gown sobbing on the ground. And when we try to interact with her, she slices the player with a knife, and then a few night folk come out of the woodwork to separate your anus from your sphincter. And this crying La Llorona-ass woman almost has a zombie-like appearance, unnaturally dark and scarred skin, and lifeless gray eyes. Yeesh. And the night folk themselves look extremely dirty and disheveled, wearing tattered, dirty clothes, and only use melee weapons and bows to attack, and they paint odd sigils and icons on the trees, and they all seem to cover themselves in white paint. And most eerily, they never seem to speak at all, outside of making pain and gurgling noises when shot. And there's a stranger quest involved with these guys too, as once we encounter the night folk, we can meet this crusty Cajun man camping in the swamp, who recruits us to help him reclaim his property from some night folk squatters who ran him off his land. But we don't learn much from this quest, as we kill all the night folk, and then fight off an attack on the man's cabin after it gets besieged by night folk reinforcements, and we kill a solid amount of them too. And that's that, leaving the night folks' motives, organizational structure, and beliefs a complete mystery to us, leaving us to only speculate on why this mute crew of homeless killers spend their days ambushing travelers and brutally slaughtering them after scaring the pants off of them first. And they're very clearly inspired by real-world voodoo practitioners who lived in and around the New Orleans and South Louisiana Bayou area, except with a much more overly murderous and horror slant to them. It's like if the swamp cult from the Call of Cthulhu was 10 times bigger, who do an excellent job at making the swamps pure nightmare feel when exploring them at night. South of Annesburg, we can find this decently sized rundown house that's all boarded up, but if we monkey mode our way up into this open window on the second floor, we can enter to find a laboratory room with Al Gore's worst nightmare strung up on the back wall, called the Man-Made Mutant by the game. It's got the head of a boar with goat horns attached to it, the hands and feet of a bear, feathers on its arms, 2 sets of animal arms coming out of its chest, and human legs, all sewn together. But luckily for us, it doesn't seem to be alive, and we can find detailed drawings of different animal parts in the lab, along with some fairly advanced looking technology too. Whoever made this chimera, and for what purpose, will never be known. But in the game's files, the mutant has some data for its model that would have allowed it to move around or come alive, which has led some people to speculate that the mutant was originally intended to be what Marko Dragic tries to bring to life during his questline, instead of the robot, as it's more in line with the Frankenstein reference. But that's just speculation, and maybe the mutant chimera was a little too on the nose, so they took a more sci-fi route for that questline. But who knows, and he remains strung up here forevermore. In Big Valley, near the carved tree faces, we can stumble across this unpleasant sight. What appears to be the aftermath of a grotesque ritual, where a bisected and completely gored body is speared on a stick, surrounded by candles and a large odd symbol on the ground, the body wearing a spooky-looking goat skull mask that we could pick up for ourselves, looking pretty intimidating. And when you visit the site again later, you'll find the original body gone, and a new, extremely decomposed corpse will appear instead, showing that this ritual site is likely still being used by its murderous worshippers. But who the hell is placing these scary-ass corpses here? Well, if we look at the symbol drawn on the ground, we can see that it closely resembles a real-world voodoo symbol for a voodoo spirit named Papa Legba. And who else in this game has ties to voodoo and horrific murder? Yeah, the Night Folk. We can see that they scrawl voodoo-esque symbols on the trees of the bayou, and they have a knack for vicious torture and murder. Also, the Night Folk cover their bodies in a white paint of some kind when ambushing people, so it seems that this ritual site belongs to them. Far away, almost on the complete other side of the map from their main area of operations, giving the anxiety-spiking implication that the Night Folk are much larger and much more spread out than we thought, which I'm personally not a fan of. The less I see, the better. In the woods of Roanoke Ridge, near the Viking burial tomb, you can spot a hairy, naked man running around in the woods yelling and hollering. But when you chase after him, he somehow has the ability to summon a wolf to protect him, and he gets away while you're distracted trying not to get your arm torn off. But on the third encounter, we can chase the man back to his home cave, where he magically summons 2 more wolves to fight for him. But once we kill the wolves, the feral man doubles over in agony and starts wailing and hollering in a mix of pain and anguish. And deeper in the cave, you can find the man's journal, where he details that he used to live a normal life with his family, until he was forced to go hunting with his father, after he was gifted a shotgun from him, to symbolize his coming of age. But this future nudist absolutely hated shooting and killing animals, breaking down into tears over shooting a simple quail, much to the chagrin of his hunt-loving pops. So to avoid being forced to kill more animals, and inspired by a book he read in school about a man who lived alone out in the wilderness, he ran away from home to start a new life in the woods, where he eventually found an abandoned litter of wolf puppies, who he took in as his own. So these wolves we put down were his only friends, and essentially his children. Damn, I feel kind of bad. Let me end your suffering. Join your pack in the sky, my hairy, naked friend. Northeast of Ansburg, on this outcropped area near the water, we can find this curious rock that has what appears to be a runic passage carved into it, surrounded by a snake creature. Now, many would assume that this is some sort of Viking rock, based on the Viking tomb that's not too far away from here. But the letters in the rock were actually written in Phoenician, and when translated, it reads, "We arrived by boat. Beautiful land, gracious people. So we left them to live in peace." Which to me reads like a bit of an ironic joke about first contact with Native Americans, as these Phoenicians did the right thing and left them be, whereas later settlers, not so much. But if the text is Phoenician, then that has some serious history-altering implications, as it would place the Phoenicians as the first true Europeans to discover the Americas, as their civilization lasted from around 2500 to 64 BC, which would be an easy 1 to potentially 3,000 years earlier than the Vikings, who reached Newfoundland around 1000 AD, which is huge if true. Those Phoenicians must have gotten really lost. But in the real world, the Phoenicians likely never even knew that there was a second continental landmass on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, and no records of an expedition to the Americas from Phoenicia was ever found. But some have claimed to have found Phoenician artifacts in America, like the Bat Creek inscription, a stone tablet found in Tennessee that was discovered in 1889, which reportedly had Phoenician letters chiseled into it, according to Cyrus H. Gordon. But no other evidence for Phoenicians in America was ever found in this area besides the rock, and many just dismiss it as a forgery. And the idea that Phoenicians not only made it to America, but also made it as far inland as Tennessee, seems far-fetched to say the least. And this carved rock might be an interesting reference to those theories that Phoenicians or early Hebrew explorers had found America millennia before any Vikings or European explorers ever did, which is some pretty cool stuff actually. In Roanoke Ridge, northeast of Ansburg, we can find what appears to be a barrow of some sort, and I feel like I'm back in Skyrim a little bit here. All I need is a Draugr to pop out at me, and by exploring the place, we can find a Viking hatchet, comb, and a Viking war helmet inside, revealing that this is an ancient Viking burial tomb, and there's a lot of skeletons and skulls in here. So whoever built this tomb must have come from a sizable community with the resources and knowledge to build such a place, and based on the amount of skeletons, there seems to have been a decently large Viking colony in these woods in the past, and this is a play on real-world archaeology, as Vikings were the first recorded Europeans to have crossed the Atlantic Ocean and have reached North America, with archaeologists discovering a Viking settlement in Newfoundland in 1960 at the Lance aux Meadows site, which is the only confirmed Viking settlement on the continent, and is speculated to be an only semi-permanent whaling and boat repair stop. But that hasn't stopped other people from claiming to have found Viking runestones and other artifacts in Minnesota, Rhode Island, Ontario, and even all the way in Oklahoma. And this tomb is just a play on all those alleged Viking finds, because the tomb is pretty deep inland, and unlike the Newfoundland site, which notably has no burial sites, this barrow suggests that the Vikings colonized this place extensively, long before any other Europeans did, which is pretty crazy to think about. One of Red Dead Redemption 2's most well-known side quests is Geology for Beginners, a quest where we must find 10 strangely detailed rock carvings across the map for this odd fella, a man named Francis Sinclair, who talks like he just jumped out of the Great Gatsby's Roaring Twenties era, not 1899, saying stuff like,
Well, I'm sorry, sport. You'll think I'm jazzed if I tell you.
You what?
Drunk?
Are you?
No, I wish. If I told you, you'd think I was on the hooch.
What?
slang that wasn't popular until decades later. And he also wears pants with belt loops on them, which weren't invented until 1922. And he flat out refuses to say what the carvings mean and what he needs them for, telling Arthur or John that they think he's drunk off his ass if he told them. So we go and find all the carvings, which mostly depict historical and futuristic scenes. A man driving a wagon, the pyramids and a sphinx, a winged human taking flight, a man's body stepping out of a portal of some kind, and what even looks like New York City getting nuked, with a mushroom cloud next to some skyscrapers. And it all seems very not of this time. And once you find all 10 carvings, you can return to the cabin to find it empty, save for a massive drawing on the wall that seems to show the fully completed rock carving image, which depicts a Francis Sinclair looking man stepping out of a portal, surrounded by modern and ancient structures, technology, and peoples, with a large head bust with a similar eye birthmark to Francis above the portal. A woman carrying a baby then walks in and asks what we're doing here, and we learn that her son Francis was born only last year, and that her husband Tom Sinclair is dead, and the baby she's holding is very Francis Sinclair-esque, having the same red hair and the red eye birthmark. But oddly enough, fans who dug through the game files have found that baby Francis has a tag on the back of his neck from Maltman & Co., a toy company in Saint Denis, implying that the baby is simply a doll. But it seems like this is just a reused asset, and I doubt Sinclair's mother would be so deep in psychosis that she thought a baby doll was her real child. So this is probably a dev-in joke. But anyway, it seems that somehow, Francis was a time traveler, and there's overwhelming evidence to support that he is. The futuristic clothes and speech patterns, the time travel themed mural, and the extremely similar baby are all just too much to deny. The only questions are, how did he time travel, and what does the mural represent? It appears to depict Sinclair himself time traveling via portal, but why a detailed mural of him time traveling was made is unknown. All Sinclair tells us is that it's important, so maybe the full mural is needed to activate time travel somehow. Also, considering the eye birthmark and the funny manner of speech he has, many fans think that he's a game universe hopper too, and that he actually comes from the Grand Theft Auto universe, as he has the Epsilon program's revered Craftian face birthmark. But the Epsilon program prohibits red hair, and besides the birthmark, there's no other factors that tie him to the GTA universe, and the birthmark is likely just there to easily identify him as a baby, and is likely just a simple reference to Grand Theft Auto. As Francis himself is likely a reference to a time-traveling character in Vice City Stories radio shows called the Time Ranger, which focused on a time traveler who spoke fast with the same type of accent as Sinclair, and it's still super mysterious and interesting to speculate on, and the devs clearly had a lot of fun making the player feel completely confused about this man's time travel abilities, and what this weird-ass mural is even supposed to represent. It looks pretty cool though. Bolger Glade is the location of a Civil War battle that took place in 1864, later known as the Battle of Scarlet Meadows. The Confederate armies were led by General Quincy Harris, who the local papers and peoples venerate as a brave war hero. He's even got his own cigarette card, he's got a big old statue of him on a horse in Saint Denis, and the fundraiser that we donate to in Saint Denis is for a building named after him too. However, on stormy nights, if you visit Bolger Glade, you'll be able to hear ghostly echoes of soldiers and sounds from the battle that seem to show General Harris's true nature. From the ghostly voices, we learn that the Battle of Scarlet Meadows went terribly for the Confederates. The Union artillery and cannons were pounding them hard, and the Yankees were pushing forward constantly. But despite this, General Harris commanded his majors to stand their ground and even tried to counterattack. Which caused their squads to get wiped out, mirroring real-life Confederate disasters like Pickett's Charge. However, despite commanding his majors and captains to fight to the bitter end, General Harris himself retreated from the battle in secret, saying that he had to move his command post back significantly.
This is, we must move my command post back significantly. No one is to retreat. Is that clear? Yes, sir.
But it's not a retreat, bro. Trust me. And the rest of his men stood their ground and got butchered. We can also learn from a letter in Martha Swain, from one of the soldiers under Harris's command, that Harris was considered a coward at the time, as he failed to reinforce another Confederate general named Quinn, so it seems that Harris forced his men into this losing battle and forced him to fight to the last in order to save his reputation, as they got torn to pieces while he fled out the back door, which seemed to have more or less worked though, considering the statue and all. And this is such a rich and interesting story that's hilariously easy to miss. It's just what makes this game great. West of the Lemoyne Swamps sits an abandoned town only known as Pleasance, which from the town sign, we learn was founded in August of 1883. However, when we take a look at these 10 lined up graves in the middle of town, we find that all the graves belong to people who died violent deaths, gunshots to the head, stabbings, and all other sorts of murder, all killed at the same time, in September 1883, only one short month after the town's founding. Even stranger, a couple of the buildings have some ominous graffiti on them, like the classic large "Plague Keep Out" sign on the barn doors, that people thought was a potential Undead Nightmare 2 teaser. How naive. And another house that has "Unclean Sinners" and "Ill with Sin" scrawled on it. Also, the church in town has no cross on it, leaving many people wondering if there was some sort of satanic chicanery going on here. And the satanic leaders of the town had murdered the population after they came to believe that the residents had become sick with some kind of sin. Whether they were physically ill with a disease, or just doing a bit of wrongthink, will never really be known, and the ironically named Pleasance will remain a desolate and mysterious place for now. Also, in the woods nearby, we can find a massive dead snake hanging in the tree. The fuck? But it's probably unrelated to the actual town. This is another pretty obscure one, as to unlock this Easter egg, you have to first study 30 unique different animals. And once that's done, you need to then head to the river near the Wapiti Indian Reservation, where a flock of birds will then take off as you approach the water. And you then have to follow these birds, until they lead you to a raised cave opening that's inaccessible on foot. But you'll hear a kindly man's voice coming from the cave, who will say that he's alone because he's too big, but he still asks you to be his friend, which Arthur or John will agree to, so we get chummy with the large unseen fella.
Hello, little fella.
Hi.
What's your name?
John. John Marston, usually. Who are you?
Well, I'm not telling you that.
And you can return in a few days for some extra dialogue, where Bigfoot here talks about his struggles with loneliness, and that people would likely kill him if he left the cave. Also, he's something of a comedian, but his words, not mine.
I like to be anonymous. I like to blend in. That's a joke. I'm well known for my humor, you see.
Now you'd think we'd be talking to Bigfoot, or some other kind of Sasquatch, as we can never actually see the giant's model while in game. However, in the game files, there is a model for the voice, and when restored, we find that it's a literal giant human man, wearing oversized clothes and a large fur vest, and he's even got 2 different models for 1899 and 1907, suggesting he was going to have a larger role in some side content, before being cut down to being a voice in a cave. Now there may be a connection between this giant and the giant bones on Mount Shan, as the bones and the giant may belong to the same species of giant humanoid. But it seems through the game's dialogue that this cave giant here is more of a human being with gigantism that ran off to hide in a cave to avoid being ridiculed and potentially murdered for his freakishly large size, rather than being a giant from a race of giant humans, as he never speaks about other giants or trying to find a giant wife or anything that implies that other giants are around besides him. But it does seem that he has the ability to talk to animals, so who knows for sure if he's a true giant or just a gigantic human, but at least he's a pretty friendly guy. And that's all that really matters at the end of the day. On the far eastern edge of Big Valley, we can find this odd lone obelisk on a hillside, and its significance and why it was built is unknown. The only info we have is a plaque on the front of the pedestal that reads, Ora fugit ne tardes, 1771, which when translated, says the hour flees, don't be late. And behind the plaque, we find a map that kicks off the landmarks of Rich's treasure hunt, where we go from the obelisk, to this comically small church in the Bayou Swamps, to the mysterious hill home, to Bolger Glade, and then finally to the Mount Shan sundial, which will now have 6 gold ingots underneath a rock as a reward for our treasure hunting skills. However, the sundial has a few multicolored arrows pointing off in seemingly random directions. They seem to point towards the general area of some other side content, like the Devil Cave, the significance of each arrow still being debated to this day. On the western edge of the Tall Trees region sits the humble settlement of Manzanita Post, a small trading outpost that sells supplies and woodworking tools to travelers. However, this humble post holds a dark story hidden beneath it. In Red Dead Redemption 2, the place is inhabited solely by Norwegian immigrants, like the OK Tools guy, who don't have much to say to the player.
Teacher's hope, okay.
But if we investigate this house on the left side of the post, Under a loose floorboard, we can find a photograph of a couple and their infant child, but on the back, the word uren, meaning impure in Norwegian, is written in all caps on the back. And if we check the chimney, we can find a Norwegian journal entry hidden inside, which my uncultured ass can't read. But when translated, we learn that the author is tortured by something he did, saying that he hears the screams and sees the faces of his victims when he tries to sleep at night. And he says that a quote-unquote father had told him it was the only option they had, but the author knows that what they did was evil and begs God for forgiveness. And if we then either hogtie or kill the older man sitting in the house, we can loot a newspaper clipping off his body, which is all in Norwegian again. But when translated, the newspaper reveals that there was a brutal killing in Lyngdal, where a man, woman, and child were all stabbed and beaten to death, the man being a migrant from Tangier, North Africa, and the woman belonging to a, quote, religious community that lived in seclusion from the rest of the public. The clipping ending with a call for information on the secluded community's whereabouts. So if we put all the clues together, it seems that the Manzanita Post settlers were from a xenophobic religious community in Norway, but one of their members married and had a child with an outsider from North Africa, which the cult clearly didn't take kindly to, and decided that the punishment for race mixing was death. What is this, the Twitter Council? Who then slaughtered the family for being impure in their eyes, and they fled from Norway to America to hide. But it seems that the guilt of their actions weighed heavily on the residents here. But no worries, justice has arrived. In the northwestern parts of Roanoke Ridge, we can find a large and sweet-looking impact crater of a meteor that fell from the heavens, and we can approach the meteor and take a chunk of meteorite off the main rock as a souvenir. And if you look up at the sky, we can even spot a meteor shower in the night sky, a cool detail. But that's not all, as if we investigate the cabin closest to the impact crater, we can enter to find a small meteor had crashed through the roof of the shack, completely obliterating the residents inside, blasting them into bloody chunks. Like, man, that looked like it fucking hurt. And we can pick up a second meteorite piece from amongst the corpses. But when we look in our inventory, it says that we have 2 out of 3 meteorites collected. This simple line of text launching a 7-year wild goose chase in the Red Dead Redemption community to try and find the 3rd meteorite piece, and see what collecting all these space rocks would give the player, as the 2 meteorites grant the player a 10% heat and cold resist, like it's a stalker artifact or something. But 7 years of searching has come up with 0 trace of the 3rd meteorite, and many have just concluded that the 3rd meteorite was yet another victim of cut content. And I mostly agree with this guess. Gamers, especially those who watch my videos, are very smart, and cunning, and attractive. And they definitely would have found the 3rd piece by now if it was still in the game. But for now, the 3rd meteorite piece is one of the longest enduring Red Dead mysteries yet. I don't know. Maybe Gavin has it or something. Now this one is really obscure, and I hadn't even heard about it until recently. At Emerald Ranch, at noon and at midnight, if you look at the 2nd floor window, you'll see a girl staring out the window for a brief time, before she walks away. Weird. So who is this woman? Well, this is Miriam Wegner, daughter of Emerald Ranch's owner, Eugene Wegner. And on a completely unrelated spot in the map up in Cumberland Forest, we can find an abandoned mail wagon on the side of the road, where amongst a few other letters, we can find a letter to Miriam from her cousin Annabelle, who was living in New York, who mentions that Miriam had lost someone named Joshua. And Annabelle also says that this is her 6th letter sent to Miriam without a response, so she suspects that her father Eugene is keeping these letters from her, and tries to scold him for it. But who is Joshua? Well, if we check the unused saloon at Emerald Ranch, we can find what appears to be the remnants of a crime scene, with large blood splotches on the floor and 3 bullet holes in the wall. And out back is a single humble grave for a Joshua Burgess, whose epitaph reads, "Accidentally shot, August 1898. So this must be the grave of Miriam's lover, a ranch hand named Joshua Burgess. So based on all this info, and Eugene's extreme asshole behavior when the player tries to interact with him, it seems that Eugene was furious that his daughter was messing around with some lowly, unwashed farmhand, and killed him in the saloon, and covered it up as an accidental death, keeping his daughter forever trapped in their house as a punishment, to keep the word from getting out, which is such a deep and interesting story that's just so easily missable. But it's also what makes this game's world truly great. In the northern part of the Bayou Enwa swamps, when it's both dark and foggy out, you can spot what looks like a glowing woman in a dress wandering the northern parts of the marsh, crying out into the night over a lost lover of hers, before she fades away and vanishes. And this is the ghost of Agnes Dowd. You can encounter her up to 16 times every 2 in-game days to get her whole story. And from her ghostly wails, it seems that Agnes would often meet an unknown lover by a tree out in the swamps, where she was eventually impregnated by these swamp sex link-ups. But her lover then suddenly left Agnes for another woman, which caused Agnes's father to become enraged at her daughter's new shame of being an unmarried mother, and shot her lover dead for unauthorized pipe laying. And this caused Agnes's mind to shatter, who we can see in the final encounter had hung herself at their special tree, where you can then find a rare orchid at the base. And at Shady Bell's old graveyard, we can find a headstone for Agnes Dowd that reads, age 19, tragically took her own life and others on September 14th, 1883. May she rest in peace. The "and others" part is interesting too, as she must have killed her father and maybe her mother, and then hung herself from her sneaky link tree, haunting the swamp area ever since, wailing forlornly and endlessly about the tragic tale of her life, which is another great side story, and I didn't know there were 16 unique encounters for just this one ghost alone. So cool. On the Braithwaite Manor property, there's a small outhouse near the banks of Flatiron Lake, and when we approach it, an arm thrashes out of the crescent moon-shaped door hole, and when we peek inside, we find what looks like a cross between a human girl and a damn pug, as she's got a cleft lip, balding hair, and a missing eye, locked away in this small poop shed hidden from the world. And this is Gertrude Braithwaite, daughter of Catherine Braithwaite, which we can learn if we take Penelope Braithwaite to the outhouse when we help her escape with Beau. And she says that Gertrude is her, quote, mentally ill cousin, who was locked up here instead of being sent to a sanatorium, to save the Braithwaite family the embarrassment of the public learning that they gave birth to a Fallout mutant, where she sits babbling weird, incoherent, and crass phrases and cackling to herself constantly. And she tries to count numbers to keep her mind focused, only to lose track around 5 or so and start stuttering and forgetting her count. So it seems that her brain is completely cooked as well. However, the mystery only gets deeper if you visit Doyle's Tavern in Saint Denis, as hanging on the wall inside is a portrait of a girl who bears a striking resemblance to Gertrude, only way more human looking. She's got the exact same haircut, 2 long braided ponytails tied off by bows, and a pretty similar outfit to Gertrude's. So who the hell is that girl in the picture? Gertrude herself pre-mutation? Another Braithwaite sister? Or someone totally unrelated? Well, interestingly, the outhouse that Gertrude is locked up in faces directly towards the creepy-ass village Butcher's Creek, which is also home to another mutant human. And it's also home to 5 outhouses that are shaped like a pentagram when connected with a line, each outhouse having a chunky tally inside that count from 1 to 5. So was Gertrude brought to, and then somehow mutated in Butcher's Creek? Or perhaps she was possessed by some sort of demon? Butcher's Creek infamously has a glowing pentagram that appears beneath a shack at 4 in the morning, heavily implying some sort of demonic presence. Also, when you return to the outhouse as John in the epilogue, we find that Gertrude had died and has been reduced to a crusty skeleton, so the poor girl must have starved to death after the Braithwaites were massacred by the VDLG. So, sorry about that, you poor mutant pug girl looking thing, but massacring your family was peak at least. North of Emerald Ranch, near a small pond, is the remote decrepit cabin called Hani's Bethel, and when we head inside, we can find that the cabin is full of beds with skeletons lying on top of them, all wearing the same matching boots, this being a clear reference to the infamous Heaven's Gate cult, who believed that their spirits could hitch a ride on a UFO that was following the passing Hale-Bopp comet by doing a ritualistic mass suicide, and once complete, the UFO and its Gleep Glorper pilots would then help the cult members ascend to the next level of existence. Somehow. So to end themselves, the cult members would eat poison mixed into applesauce and then had tied bags over their heads. And once they were dead, their bodies were then arranged onto beds and covered with shrouds and blankets. And each of the 39 members who partook in the mass suicide all wore the same black Nike shoes and matching outfits at death. And this cabin also has a central altar with a priestly-looking skeleton, with a strange sermon on said altar that can give us some more info about the place. The sermon ties this area to the Heaven's Gate cult even further, as this cult believed in an alien being called Kukawaba, who they Heaven's Gated themselves for so he could bring them to a, quote, promised realm, where they'll yuck it up in paradise for a century or so, before returning to worship at Mount Shan, hinting at us to check that place out for any other alien activity. Also, the note starts by saying, at the 2nd hour under the half moon, so if you return to the cabin around 2 a.m., the cabin will suddenly be cast in a green glow, and ominous whooshing sounds can be heard. And if you look up, you'll see an honest to Kukawaba UFO hovering around the cabin overhead. But if you leave the cabin, the UFO quickly flies back up into the sky and disappears, never to return. So maybe that was Kukawaba himself in his flying saucer, but he showed up a little late to pick up the souls of the cultists. A bit awkward, and he bugged out in embarrassment. At Van Horn Trading Post, on a wall in town, we can find a missing poster for a Princess Isabeau Katharina Zinsmeister of Luxembourg, who vanished at the age of 5 from a remote hunting lodge in 1884 while visiting America with her family, and she has been missing for 15 years. But besides this poster, an NPC near Elysian Pool who says he's looking for her, and a small chest in the Van Horn fence with the initials IKZ and the coat of arms of Luxembourg on it. This likely being her personal chest that was later sold off or something. And despite these three things, Princess IKZ is nowhere to be found in the game, and it wasn't until the PC release of Red Dead Redemption 2 came out that we got some more information about her, as an adult version of IKZ was found in the game's files, matching her in-game age of around 20 years old or so, and it seems that IKZ was a victim of cut content. And there's a massive amount of cut content in this game, and a quest that involved finding her as an adult was likely cut pretty late into development because of how much setup there is, plus the finished model, which may have seen Arthur or John finding the long-lost princess, but based on the fact that her clothes seem to be in good condition, and she seems to be completely fine and uninjured, reaching her 20s without biting it. So IKZ might have been doing just fine out in the wilderness for all those years. Also, curiously enough, she has a reddish birthmark around her right eye, which is a direct reference to the Epsilon program from the GTA universe, the GTA parody of Scientology, who believe that people with birthmarks on their face are descendants of their god Kraft, which sort of ties her to Francis Sinclair, who has the same birthmark. But since we're yet to find her naturally in the game world, all these details are dead ends that we can only speculate on, and I guess we'll never truly know what Rockstar's original plans for her were. At Compson's Stead, the home of a former slave catcher and current shark corpse Jeremiah Compson, there's a fairly large well out in the yard, and we can access the bottom via a ladder, where we can pick up a few quarters at the bottom. However, we can notice some scratches on the wall, and a tally of 61 marks, which is likely a tally of how many days someone was stuck down in this well, one tally per day. However, under the tallies, we can also see 3 crosses, as well as 3 clouds and a sun drawn in the wall, which has left many players intrigued as to what the significance of the crosses, clouds, and sun are. Maybe it's some sort of hidden clue to find a place with 3 crosses, and when it's a cloudy day, some sort of event may trigger. But as far as I know in my research, no matching location for these clouds and crosses has ever been found. It could possibly point to the 3 graves found near Compson's camp when you complete his quest, and others claim it may be a reference to Emerald Ranch's graveyard, which would then subtly point you towards Hani's Bethel and all the UFO shit. And others claim that the 61 tallies mean that you need to collect 61 of something. But at that point, I feel like we're entering El Israel 2401 levels of wild goose chasing. But in my opinion, there's an equally likely chance that the markings mean nothing at all, and it was just the drawings of what the person down here saw when looking up out of the well, passing the time by sketching clouds and crosses in the wall. And considering Compson's Stead has wall chains in the basement for holding captured slaves, it's probably most likely that this well was used as a sort of solitary confinement cell for any captured slave that acted up, and was put in the well as punishment. The poor guy marking the days he spent trapped down here. Some really bleak shit, but amazing environmental storytelling. Butcher's Creek is by far the weirdest settlement in the entire game, being this backwater village inhabited by the scraggliest and most unwashed NPCs in the game. They act hostile towards the player if you linger in town too long, and they often mention some sort of curse or dark force affecting them.
The curse got you too.
There's also this lumpy mutant man shredding a banjo. He's killing that shit too. He's actually pretty chill. And during the Wisdom of the Elders Stranger questline, we get to learn more about the town, and the residents think that they're haunted by some sort of malicious demon or force of darkness that is making the townspeople go insane and causing them to develop skin afflictions and mutations, as well as causing nearby animals to become sick and violent. And we also meet a self-proclaimed shaman who tells the villagers that he can commune with the spirits, although he clearly has some ulterior motives and is trying to fool these poor hicks somehow. Throughout the quest though, we learn that the town's problems are likely being caused by an abandoned mine, the lead and arsenic runoff from the mine contaminating the water supply of the town and poisoning the living things around Butcher's Creek. And we then catch the quote-unquote shaman trying to trick the villagers into signing a liability waiver so the villagers can't sue the fuel company that managed the mine. But despite proving the water is contaminated with brain-rotting metals, and it's likely the source of their troubles, the Butcher's Creek residents still think a demonic curse is still in effect, the mining company just being a demonic agent of the curse. And at this point, most would just chalk this up to backwater superstitions. However, that is, until we take a look at this ruined shack in town at 4 a.m., as from 4 to 5 a.m. every day, a massive glowing red pentagram appears under the shack, What in the goddamn? So this glowing pentagram, plus the oddly tallied outhouses that create a pentagram shape when connected in sequence, it seems that there is some honest-to-God demonic activity going on here. And this demonic presence might be responsible for Gertrude Braithwaite's mutations. The outhouse connection just runs too deep. So it looks like this town is under a 1-2 punch of demonic influence and lead and arsenic contaminated water going on at the creek. So it makes sense that it's such a fucked up place. Under the window rock arch, we can find a mysterious mural painted onto the side of the rock, displaying a weird compass-looking shape with human bodies standing around it. And the whole rock wall is covered in painted hand outlines, like it's the Cueva de los Manos, famous ancient human cave art that dates all the way back to 7000 BC. Now in a vacuum, this mural seems to make no sense, until we enter this cave that's not too far away in Amberino, where we can stumble upon a weird-ass central chamber full of human man statues, surrounding a central statue of a harpy creature, looking like some sort of ominous ritual room. And there's a puzzle here to solve, as you have to press the buttons of the statues that display prime numbers with their fingers. So you have to press the statues with 2, 3, 5, and 7 fingers respectively, and if done correctly, the Harpy's altar will open, revealing a treasure of 3 gold bars worth $500 each, which combined would be about $57,000 today, according to this RDR2 inflation calculator. So that's a pretty good deal for just pressing a few buttons. And I love how mysterious these statues are, as the mural and outlined hands imply that this is a very, very ancient structure. But who would build these odd humanoid statues? Chiseled meat and all, as well as the weird harpy statue that has a convoluted locking mechanism puzzle built in. It shall never be known. In the woods near the part of the map labeled Roanoke Valley, if you take some time to walk around in the woods and listen to the breeze, you'll soon start hearing ghostly whispering, sounding like a woman talking to her lover or boyfriend, saying, "You should be ashamed of yourself, Eugene," and "I need to get home."
What's that terrible noise? Must be a sick cat looking for its mom. They've been known to bawl like that. You should be ashamed of yourself, Eugene. I need to get back home.
Which doesn't make too much sense on its own, until we watch an in-game movie called The Ghastly Serenade that tells the story of a young couple, Ethel Beauchard and Eugene Hutton, who snuck out into the woods near Ansburg to engage in some uncouth courtship practices. And Eugene is the same name that the ghostly voices mention, so it looks like we found our ghost couple. Eugene even pulls a prank on Ethel by hiding in the woods and then jumping out to scare her, where Ethel will then say the lines that we can hear in the woods about being ashamed. But their fate, according to the movie, seems a bit hard to believe. As in the movie, Eugene and Ethel are then attacked by an army of undead British soldiers, and one of the zombie lobsterback chops Eugene's head clean off, but Eugene's head is still alive, its eyes looking all around. And then Ethel then takes Eugene's still living head and runs back to Ansburg, where she's then accused of being a witch by the townsfolk, who burn her at the stake. The movie closing with the moral to not mess around in the woods with your lover, or else undead British soldiers may cut off your head and the locals will burn you alive. And I'm gonna go out on a limb and say this movie is probably a bit fabricated, but since there are actual ghostly voices that exist in the woods, Ethel and Eugene's story is very likely true, but probably occurred much differently than the movie, considering no ghostly evil redcoats can be found in the game, so the movie is likely exploiting the story to moralize on young people to not get freaky in the woods. So the couple may have been attacked by early Murfrees, or perhaps a wild animal of some sort, their souls lost to the woods eternally. Freaky. In Saint Denis, you can find 5 strange passages written in dark red on the walls in some obscure corners of the city, which seem to be retelling some sort of dark prophecy. And once you find all 5 of the vampire's pages, he's stealing Slenderman's whole bit here. It reads out,
"Five's bones under the perfect star Nosferatu. With Dominica will become mortal again. O sweetest of napes, may your blood remain forever on my lips. 6 there will be, before the lust is sated. With one long kiss, I draw the life from her, and await the outpost of the advancing day. I feed again the blood of life, the circle has begun. I drink from the maiden, and live again in the dead, the heart of the ring of blood."
Whatever that fucking means.
And that'll form a pentagram map in your journal, and you then have to wait until around midnight and look around inside the pentagram's area until you find an ex-dead body marker in an alleyway. And when you investigate, you find a Nosferatu-ass rat vampire feeding on a civilian. And the vampire then tells you to fuck off and get lost. And you can either leave or start talking some shit to him.
You're a goddamn idiot.
I'll suck you dry.
And he will attack you with a wicked-looking dagger and charge you after saying he'll suck you up. And you can then destroy this demonic entity with a quick spank from your big iron. And take his cool dagger for yourself. And there's not much else to this vampire quest, but it's such a great and creepy little Easter egg. And the vampire absolutely gutted me like a fish the first time. Jesus. When riding around the Lake Isabella area in the snowy grizzlies, the corpses of an old couple will spawn in, mummified from the freezing mountain conditions. And when we approach the corpses, we find that they're holding a mysterious and highly detailed map that we literally pry from their cold dead hands. And we open it to discover a surprisingly detailed map that seems to have been drawn from the top of a tall mountain, overlooking Flatiron Lake, lines pointing out towards all the visible cities and towns in the area. And we can follow this map to the summit of Mount Shan, which matches the map perfectly. And if we wait on the mountain until nighttime, at around 1 a.m. or so, a small UFO will drop down out of the sky and hover near the mountain for a little bit, before floating up and away, never to be seen again. And unlike the Hani's Bethel UFO, this one is so small and cute, it almost seems like a little RC UFO or something. But the small UFO Easter egg isn't all there is to the map, as also on Mount Shan, scrawled into the mountainside, is what appears to be another panoramic map with lines projecting out towards other unknown settlements. And this map is way trickier to figure out, but gamers are pretty sure that this second map leads to the Twin Rocks area in New Austin. And when placing this second panoramic map over the game's map, it seems to line up perfectly, all the lines pointing towards towns and settlements. And we can even climb up this rock and sit down using a context prompt, which is pretty rare to find, and it must mean that we're in the right place. I don't think it's mere coincidence. So we sit down, look around, and nothing. Wait around all day and night, nothing will happen. No third UFO will appear, nor will anything else, and the trail of the panoramic map just goes ice cold at this point. So based on all this info, we could probably guess that this second panoramic map is another victim of cut content, which was likely cut alongside all plans for Arthur to be able to enter New Austin. But Rockstar kept the mountain map in the game to keep stubborn players guessing for years, and to add to the mysterious aura of the game and its UFO encounters. And I think it ended up working pretty well, despite the overall disappointment of no third UFO. The most legendary of all these stranger quests is the I Know You questline, where John can come across this sharply dressed man overlooking a cliff. John doesn't recognize him, but the man seems to know a lot about John. Too much, actually. He knows his name and his association with the Vanderlyn gang in the past, bringing up the Blackwater ferry robbery, and he even reveals the name of the girl that Dutch shot during it, her name being Heidi McCourt. He'll then ask John to help prevent a man from cheating on his wife in Thieves Landing, and we help dissuade the man from throwing out his marriage for some cheap cooter. We then run into the man again in Not Monument Valley in Mexico, where he critiques John's existence, questioning why he respects the sanctity of marriage, despite being a prolific mass killer and robber. And he also ominously confirms that John will be judged by the higher authorities when it's his time.
You kill people so easily, yet you respect the vows of marriage. That's very curious.
I'll let the appropriate authorities judge my morality, friend.
Yes, you will. And they shall.
He then asks us to help out a nun who is collecting money for the poor. So we head on over and slide her a few bucks. And we then have our final encounter with the man right outside of Beecher's Hope, the man commenting that it's a beautiful and fine spot where he's standing. John completely unaware that this is the hill that he and Abigail will be buried on later. But John isn't happy that this mysterious dude is creeping on his property, and he demands to know the man's name. But the man simply says that he doesn't remember.
What's your name?
You know, it's the darndest thing. I can't remember.
And John is enraged that the man refuses to tell him his name and keeps playing mind games with him. So he pulls out his pistol and shoots the man in the back 3 times. But the bullets seemingly do nothing, and the man disappears shortly after walking away, leaving fans baffled to this day as to who that man was. Was he another ghost? A manifestation of John's guilt? The Grim Reaper? The devil? A demon from hell? Or maybe even God himself? Who knows? But let's investigate a little bit. Most of our interactions with the man deal with him ruminating on John's lopsided morality and his violent past, and testing him to make moral choices, like stopping a man from committing the sin of adultery, to helping a nun with a generous donation, testing the player to not rob her of the easy $300 that she's got in her bucket. And in our final encounter with him, the man perfectly foreshadows John's death, before absorbing 3 bullets and completely vanishing. So considering the intimate knowledge on John's life, and his curious invulnerability to bullets, we can assume that he's definitely some sort of supernatural entity at the very least. We can also see a portrait of him in the Armadillo General Store in Red Dead Redemption 2, and John even has a line about how familiar the man seems, despite it being 4 whole years before they even meet. Not only that, in the swamps of Lemoyne, we can also find a small shack that seemingly belongs to the strange man himself. It's full of odd paintings everywhere and strange phrases painted into the walls, like "I know you" and "the water runs black with plague." And there's also a limerick scratched into a tabletop mentioning Jimmy Brooks, a guy who claims to be from Blackwater, who tries to report Arthur for his involvement in the massacre after recognizing him early in the game's story, but he accidentally runs off a cliff. So you can either help him or let him die, and the limerick will change based on your choice, leading some to believe that Jimmy was the strange man in disguise, because why mention Jimmy Brooks here? And Jimmy Brooks offers the player a moral choice to make, something we know the strange man loves to do. Also, there's a map of Armadillo in his shack that has a cryptic message about a pact he made with someone that would last 2 generations, and it's heavily implied that the man he made the pact with was Herbert Moon, the cartoonishly racist and anti-Semitic general store owner in Armadillo, who was curiously the only man seemingly immune to the devastating cholera outbreak that the town is going through back in 1911. And Herbert also seemingly survived the 1899 scarlet fever outbreak in Armadillo as well, which we can read about in the newspapers. But by the way, Herbert Moon is a hilarious character. He's like a western version of current-day Kanye West, a parody on conspiracy theorists and old-school racists. He blames the Jews for all the world's problems, seems to revere general store ownership, and will constantly call out his own name when in distress, like he sort of reveres himself, saying shit like,
You can't eat me! I'm Herbert!
He also has a daughter named Herberta, who he disowned after she married a Jewish man. Although, when John asked where Herbert Moon got his picture of the strange man, Herbert says that someone just gave it to him, and he simply liked it. But it definitely seems like the strange man and Herbert made a weird-ass pact of some kind. It's all too coincidental and connected. Also, if you visit the shack after some time passes, the painting in the middle of the shack starts becoming more and more clear, until it reveals a painting of the man as he appears in Red Dead Redemption 1. And he even jump scares the player by appearing in the mirror behind John, but if you turn around, he completely vanishes. Spooky. But I think we'll never truly know the answer as to the man's true identity. And originally, I thought he might be some kind of angel, based on his seemingly divine knowledge, powers, and his focus on critiquing and observing John's morality. But if the RDR2 Swamp Shack is indeed the strange man's house, which it seems highly likely that it is, then I don't think he's an angel, as the ominous writing on the walls and the implied pact with Herbert Moon seem far too sinister to be the work of an angel. He instead seems to be some sort of supernatural painter who thrives off testing human morality and making mysterious pacts with bigoted store owners for unknown purposes. But he's definitely real and definitely supernatural, not a manifestation of John's psyche. But the question is he Team Heaven or is he Team Hell? And I'm leaning towards the demonic side. Or maybe he's just a really weird accountant.
I'm an accountant.
Is that so?
In a way.
But regardless, it's still such a cool and mysterious quest that fits the game's themes of what redemption means if John can even achieve it amazingly well, and it adds a really awesome aura of mystery to the world. Plus, the dude has a sick top hat. Shit reaches the stratosphere.